To the left-hand side for Vieira, who'll play it through to Gabriel Jesus, who's in here for Arsenal. Gabriel Jesus to finish it off. Oh, what a way to do it! Gabriel Jesus seals the points for Arsenal. He's back, and he's back with a bang. Into the penalty area it goes. Gabriel's header, and it's into the back of the net. Arsenal take an early lead through Gabriel.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the daily Arsenal podcast with me, Harry Symeou.
Good afternoon, everybody. How's it going? Welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast, with me, your host, Harry Symeou. It's another episode where, considering there are literally no games, we're in that really awkward period between the season ending and, of course, the European Championships kicking off, which happens later on this week. Really excited about that, by the way. But considering we're in that weird phase of the season and in that phase of the year, I actually think there's quite a bit to talk about, which is good for people like me, for people who are reliant upon talking points being there and available for us to make podcasts, essentially. Big good afternoon to everybody joining us in the live chat. I can see, as always, there are plenty of you with us, which is always great to see. Thank you so much for all your support. A big thank you to John, who says, happy anniversary, Harry and Mrs. Harry. Yes, thank you very much. It is my wedding anniversary today. 7 years I've been married. Long time. Really, really long time. It's flown by. They say that time flies when you're having fun, right? Big hello to everybody joining us, as I say, in the live chat. Good to see so many of you here. Let's start then with our first story, because we've got a fair few to get through today. So let's not waste any time. We're going to start off by talking Arsenal's Scotland international defender, Kieran Tierney. What does the future look like for him? And do we have an update with regards to maybe what Arsenal's plans or thinking is ahead of this summer? So we know that Kieran Tierney is more than likely going to leave Arsenal this summer. It was a signing that we made not that long ago. Probably, well, I say not that long ago. It's probably about 4 or 5 years now since we signed Kieran Tierney. He came in with loads of promise, loads of high hopes. And for a long time, I think we had a problem at left back, and you brought this guy in and you thought, this is fantastic. This is exactly what I want. He's a traditional fullback who is, in my opinion, very committed, hates losing, always wants to succeed, always wants to win, and he's just incredibly enthusiastic. And that rubs off on the people around him, I should say. And I'm sad that this hasn't really worked out. But the truth is, guys, it hasn't worked out. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. I think you can sit there and you can say Kieran Tierney's ability, and, his potential, was never in question, I don't think. But obviously, injuries have played a massive part. And then you add the injuries plus the fact that we just changed the way that we were playing drastically, and he no longer really fitted in. It was no longer about just keeping him fit anymore. It was about trying to make Kieran Tierney play a totally different game, and it just wasn't happening. He acknowledged that. I think we acknowledged that. Mikel Arteta obviously felt that way, and he was allowed to go out on loan. But now, this summer, he is returning. And the question is, where does he go? What do we do with him? And how much should we be willing to accept for this former Celtic man? And according to some reports coming out of Scotland, Arsenal would be willing to let Kieran Tierney leave for something in the region of £10 million. I can hear people now screaming back at me. £10 million, is that it? I've been telling you guys all along that if you think you're going to get 20, 30 million pounds for some of these players that we're looking to move on this summer, you are living on cloud cuckoo land, because Kieran Tierney's value has depreciated dramatically over the last few years, mainly because of injuries, but also because he's been sent out on loan to Spain at a lesser known club, at a club where, yeah, okay, they're fighting for European football and they were in the Champions League and all the rest of it, and that's great, happy days. But a club where he's not going to be under the spotlight anywhere near as much as he would at Arsenal. And that's just the reality of things. So £10 million for Kieran Tierney, to me, probably feels about right. I've got to say, I'm interested to get you guys' take on this in the live chat. Let me know how much you think Arsenal should be looking to take for Kieran Tierney this summer. But to me, that feels about right. And I'll explain a little bit about why. So Arsenal signed Kieran Tierney from Celtic back on August the 8th, 2019 for a fee of around about 27 million euros. Now, if I convert that, what's 27 million euros in pounds today? About 22 million. Okay. So what you're talking about, if you paid 22 million for the guy way back then in 2019, with 4 years, 5 years this August, I beg your pardon, down the line. And what's happened? He's not played anywhere near enough games for Arsenal. He's been sent out on loan because he's been deemed surplus to requirements. And we know that injuries continue to be an issue for the Scotland international defender. Accepting 50% or just under 50% of what we paid for him 5 years ago, given the way things have gone for Kieran Tierney, actually would be pretty good, I think. It would be a pretty good achievement. I've seen some people getting onto me in the comments and some people getting onto others on X saying 10 million for Kieran Tierney. Is that it? I'm gonna kill Edu if that's all he gets for him. I'm gonna crucify him. Blah blah blah. No, for someone that's been with the club since 2019, who's had to go out on loan, who's been deemed surplus to requirements, and whose injury problems are just not going away, I think to get 10 million for Kieran Tierney would be pretty solid business this summer. Let me know your thoughts. I know some will disagree. I know some will agree, but it's about right to me. Safe Hands Chris says 10 to 15 million is about the right value for Tierney. What else have we got? Ron Stone suggesting that maybe Celtic would be interested in taking him back. Khalid says should have at least marked him at 18 to 15 million. On what planet? 18 million pounds. So you're saying he's only worth 4 million pounds less after 5 really underwhelming years. He's 5 years older as well. Let's not forget that part, right? We're talking about someone now who's 27 years old. He's not exactly a young prospect or a project signing with the potential to go bang. This is Kieran Tierney today. This is Kieran Tierney now. Somebody that when he plays can be very good and very effective, but is probably going to break down quite a bit over the course of a season. And the minute you loan players out, the minute you start making it obvious, and you have to do this as a manager because you need that ruthless nature to a degree, but the minute you start sending people out on loan and making it very clear that they're not a part of your plans, you cannot accept to get top dollar for them anymore. 18 to 15 million is too much, Khalid. If we get 10 million, I'd be over the moon. In fact, I would accept 8 or 9 million pounds based on the way things have gone for Kieran Tierney at Arsenal. And I know people will say no, and I know people will disagree. Khalid says, no, what I'm saying is to start higher and hopefully get more than what he's worth. No one's going to come in. Just like no one's going to come in and offer that money if you set the price and the bar too high. Halo Mateus says, I agree. I almost always have that feeling in both buying and selling that Arsenal aren't very good at it. Either pay a bit too much or get a bit too little in selling. I would argue, Halo, that the selling thing has been a real problem for us in recent years, but that is a consequence of having an over-bloated, overpaid squad that simply wasn't good enough in a lot of departments. And we're still at the point where we're recovering from that. I mean, the Kieran Tierney signing, for example, is not a bit of business that Eddie and Arteta done. It's a bit of business that predates them, right? So I'm not going to sit there and slaughter those guys for the fact that we're not going to get a lot of money for him. I think a lot of the big clubs, you could put them into the same category as probably have to pay a little bit more when they want a player because everybody knows who they are and their financial power and muscle and might, but probably often have to let players go on the cheap when they don't want them because if they're your cast-offs, then they're not exactly going to be flavor of the month, are they? So I don't think you're going to get people coming in making huge offers for these players. I think Arsenal have been worse at selling than a lot of other big clubs in recent years. So I take that criticism for sure. And I agree with that and I'd apply that. But when it comes to the buying thing, I think all big clubs have to slightly overpay. And all big clubs, the minute they make it clear that a player is not really the one for them, are going to have to suffer losses on people. That's just the way it goes for me. Cass says, all we can hope is that Tierney has a good Euros and maybe his price will increase. But I'm like you. At this moment, I would take 10 million for him. Kieran Tierney looks like he's going to be off this summer. Will Arsenal even get the 10 million that they're setting as the bar for the Scotland international now? As you guys say, hopefully he has a good Euros and maybe that will change. Let's move on to some news coming out of Portugal. And this was on the back page of A Bola this morning. Porto are contemplating a move for Fabio Vieira. Now, this paper says, just in case Chico, who has interest from Borussia Dortmund and RB Leipzig, leaves, and that opens up a spot for a player in that position. Now, of course, we signed Fabio Vieira from the Portuguese outfit, so he'd be returning home. And I was in Porto at the start of last season. I went to watch them play against Barcelona in the UEFA Champions League, and I was speaking to some people who work for the club and have worked there for a long, long time. And they were really positive about Fabio Vieira. I said, like, look, first season, we didn't really see it. Hoping this season will be a bigger one. It didn't turn out that way because obviously his injury problems caused him an issue, and he was out from, I think, November probably through till February, where he might have got some game time. I thought he looked lively at the start of the 23-24 season, but it just didn't carry through. And as I keep saying, the injury was a big issue on that. And I know a lot of people are looking at this and going, well, if Porto want him, then sell him, cut your losses on Fabio Vieira. I know a lot of people out there are not convinced that he'll ever make it as an Arsenal player. But it's important to dig into this story a little bit more because it clearly says that actually Porto would be looking to bring him in on loan. And as Charles Watts reported earlier today as well, or was saying on his channel, what Porto would be looking for is a loan deal whereby Arsenal are subsidizing quite a bit of his wage, because the wages that he's on at Arsenal are significantly better than the wages that he was on at Porto prior to his arrival in North London. And to make it worth his while, we would have to do some kind of deal whereby we are footing some of that bill. And I just don't think it's worth letting him go under those terms. If you're telling me you're going to get a percentage of your transfer fee for Fabio Vieira back, and maybe the decision should be taken to just cut your losses, I can kind of live with that. I can't live with the idea of paying him to play for someone else. And if we talk about all the departures we're expecting this summer, we've constantly gone over Emile Smith-Rowe and his situation, then you might say that we need Fabio Vieira. And so to let him go on loan would be silly in that sense. Would he, by going out and playing more regularly and building up his confidence again in a league that he knows, would he then come back a better player? Did he make the move to Arsenal maybe slightly too soon? If he doesn't come back to Arsenal but is successful back in the north of Portugal, would he then have a greater value, in which case we could recoup a larger portion of the transfer fee that we paid? Maybe. But I think there's a lot of maybes in that. So for me, I'd keep a hold of Fabio Vieira unless someone comes to the table with money that looks worthwhile. And to let him go out on loan just doesn't make sense to me. It really, really doesn't. What else have we got? Halo says, conflicted about Vieira. I struggle to see him level up his play to the level that he has to be at Arsenal. But in the same way, I think that selling or loaning him out means that another investment is needed. Robert says, I said after a few months after he joined, this player won't be an Arsenal player. It was a risky purchase, and it looks like we'll have to see out his contract. I'm not saying that we'll have to see out his contract, because I think, I think we could move Fabio Vieira on maybe next year. I look at this and think this is probably Fabio Vieira's last season to make an impression at Arsenal. Did we pay a little bit over the odds for him? Yeah, but he's only 24 years old. He's got that contract at Arsenal, which runs until 2027. So if he did go out on loan or did have another under par season, his value hasn't completely diminished. Okay, it's not going to be the 35 million euros that we paid to FC Porto to get him in, but I still think there'd be some value to Fabio Vieira, because I really do think he's a talented footballer. Physically, I worry about him. I don't know if he can handle what you need to be successful in the Premier League. I mean, we often talk about Odegaard and his technical brilliance, but his physical brilliance is just incredible as well. And I don't know that Fabio Vieira has that side of it. So, yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But interest from Portugal, however, it is on a loan basis, which isn't going to really help us, I don't think. Maybe it will in the long term, but not today. Chris says, I think one more season for Vieira, and if he doesn't make it, then we might have to look to move him on. Jid says, Vieira is a good second option. I really don't get why we would sell him. Is it because he isn't a starter level player? Well, maybe that's because that's not his role. Interesting. Khalid says, would you be open to swapping Vieira for Rafinha or someone plus cash? I don't know that Barcelona would be interested in that deal. Eastern Pool payers, I beg your pardon, says, I think it's worthwhile for him to move on. From Fabio Vieira's point of view, it probably is. It probably is. Because he'll be frustrated by the lack of game time that he's had since arriving at Arsenal. Although I will always caveat that point by saying, I think he would have played more had he not picked up the injury that he did earlier this season. Let's talk Aaron Ramsdale, who we discussed a few days ago. We were talking about asking prices. I said that I don't think we would achieve £30 million for Aaron Ramsdale, or we'd be lucky if we did, given the fact that, he's no longer the number one at Arsenal. Well, I guess technically until we sign David Raya, you could argue that he is the number one. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. But according to a piece in The Sun, Arsenal are looking for £50 million to sell Aaron Ramsdale, which is made up of a guaranteed £40 million plus add-ons. When I read this, I just started laughing. I just burst out with laughter. I couldn't believe what I was reading here. You're not getting £50 million for Aaron Ramsdale at this stage. No, it's just not happening. First of all, I think his stock has dropped dramatically by being sort of ousted the way he has been by David Raya and Mikel Arteta and his coaching staff. I've talked about it loads. I think he's a good goalkeeper. I think when he's got a bit of rhythm and he's playing regularly again, you're going to see Aaron Ramsdale return to the Aaron Ramsdale that we saw the season before last, where he was very consistent with the exception of maybe a few games at the back end of the campaign. But £50 million is bonkers. If you're setting your stall out that high, then you got to be pretty sure and pretty confident that either A, there's wiggle room for you to kind of drop that price down, or you're doing it because you want to keep the player and you want to show him that you really value him. And, you think that because of what it's going to cost you to bring in someone else and the hassle and headache that comes with that and the effort that comes with that, you want to be compensated enough to make that worth your while. If I was Aaron Ramsdale and I wanted the move, and I don't know that Aaron Ramsdale does, but if I was him and I wanted the move, I would be knocking on Edu's door right now and saying, you're pricing me out of any move here. So you can tell me that you'd let me go if the right fee comes in and that, my wants and needs are being taken into consideration. But a price tag like that is bonkers. £50 million for a goalkeeper who played a handful of games last season and is clearly Arsenal's backup goalkeeper at this moment in time. I was staggered when I read that. I really, really was. Let me read some of you guys' thoughts on this. What else have we got in terms of this Ramsdale stuff? Just trying to pick between what's Ramsdale related and what's Vieira related in the chat. Well, this is a general point from G. Abe, who says, Harry, stop dumping on our players and their values. I'm not dumping on the player. I keep saying this, and I'm actually sick of saying it, to be honest with you, because I find it really difficult to comprehend why people can't get this point into their heads. PSR has killed us. PSR has put clubs like Aston Villa, who have just qualified for the Champions League and should be dining out at the top table and should be ready to go out and splash huge major cash on their squad to make it ready for what's to come, are having to think twice because PSR has crippled this league. And yes, the laws are going to be relaxed And yes, that will probably mean that teams go back to having a bit more wiggle room. We heard about a vote about increasing the amount of money that you're allowed to lose, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that's going to come into play. But this summer market will still be impacted. So a player that you might think is worth £30 million is probably only going to be sold for £20 million this summer. So if I'm saying that Aaron Ramsdale at £30 million, because he's hardly played for a year, and his star has fallen as a result of that, is going to be difficult to achieve. How can I sit here the next day reading a report like this and tell you, no, actually, I'm confident that we will get £50 million in total for this goalkeeper? We are not getting anywhere near that. It's not dumping on players and their values. That's being realistic about the situation. That's all I'm doing. AFC Bermsey says Arsenal don't want to go and buy another goalkeeper, hence the high price tag. Despite the lack of games, media spent all year saying he's better than Raya still, so some value is held ruthless, though, from the Arsenal. Trev says, speaking from Cuckoo Land, don't you think Ramsdale being an England international would warrant that price tag? Not really. And the reason I say that is because he's not England's number one. If he was England's number one, then maybe I could see where you're coming from. And I'd say, okay, being England's number one probably does add something. It's a good thing to have on your CV, right? It's a good thing to have on your card when, you know, you're being transferred or when people are talking about and trying to figure out, you know, how much they should spend for you and how far they're willing to push the boat out. But we all know that when the tournament starts, he's going to play second fiddle to Jordan Pickford. And barring a disaster, barring a problem for Jordan Pickford, Aaron Ramsdale probably doesn't get a single minute at the Euros. And he's had very few minutes over the course of last season. So how people can tell me that we're going to achieve £50 million for this guy now is beyond me. I just don't get it. I like him. I think he's a really good goalkeeper. I think anybody that manages to get him would be lucky to have him. But £50 million is not a realistic amount of money to demand. If you ask for 50 and you get 30, 35, you take it because you know that the 50 is an overinflated valuation of a player whose character has probably pulled the wool over some people's eyes in terms of what he's actually worth. He's a good goalkeeper, yes. But I think if you look at how Arsenal improved afterwards, you look at the number of clean sheets that followed his removal from the first team. And again, I'm not saying that those clean sheets are only down to the goalkeeper change or that Aaron Ramsdale was the only problem. But you look at how all of that has transpired and developed. It is impossible to sit here with a straight face and say that we're going to get 50 million for Aaron Ramsdale this summer. Steve Stone says lower transfer fees are good in the long run, in my opinion. I agree. I agree with that. And I'm fine with it. But we just got to be honest about it, honestly. That's all I'm saying. Leslie makes the point about European clubs as well. He says increasing what clubs can spend in the PL won't benefit clubs in Europe as they have their own PSR rules that have a lower threshold. That's another thing. When we talk about these markets, so like we talked about Fabio Vieira already today, we're now talking about Aaron Ramsdale. We always look at it and we go, well, we should get X amount of money, but it depends who the buyer is. Because if a player like Fabio Vieira, who in my opinion is more likely to move abroad than he is to move to another Premier League club, then you have to consider their financial situation and the markets that they operate in. And you're not going to be able to get the same money that you would get in a Premier League to Premier League transfer. That's just the reality. That is the reality of it. Let's see what else we've got. Safe Hands Chris says, I think Ramsdale is a better all-round goalkeeper than Raya. However, the latter is more suited to the way we play. So I still think 30 million is a fair price for him. There's a big difference, Chris, between 30 and 50. You're talking nearly double. But I agree with you that 30 million is what we should be aiming for. If we get him, if we get 25 million with some add-ons or whatever, then, or a total of like 27, 28, I'd take that as well. There's no need to go like to be panic about this at this stage. Like it is really early. The window hasn't even officially opened yet, but I just think to set a price of 50 million for him is mental, and it's not something we're going to achieve. No way. Okay, let's move on to our final story of the day. Arsenal are interested, according to the papers, in the £65 million rated Bournemouth striker, Dominic Solanke. So far, we've been linked with SESKO. We've been linked with Gyökeres, although that seems to have gone a little bit quiet. We've been linked with Victor Osimhen. We're also being linked again with Joshua Zirkzee of Bologna. Reports coming out of Italy suggesting that Arsenal haven't given up all hope of potentially signing him, that they're monitoring his situation very closely. If I had to gamble today on where Joshua Zirkzee would end up, I'd be looking at one of the big Milan clubs. I think he will probably stay in Serie A, but according to those reports, as I say, Arsenal are keeping close tabs on him. What do I think about Dominic Solanke? I have to admit, it's not a signing that excites me. You know, I say it's not a signing. We're not doing it as far as I know, but it's not a name that excites me. He's not somebody that will move the needle really that much for me. He's not somebody that I would be buzzing to go down to the Emirates Stadium and watch. I think that there's an argument that he's not even as good as what we currently have at centre forward in Kai Havertz, for example, in terms of his all-round game. Bournemouth had a really good season after a really, really difficult start, but it just feels to me like that's Dominic Solanke's level. And I'm going to demonstrate why I feel that in a minute. But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. There's no buzz around this for me. It just doesn't do it for me. Am I being a bit of a snob? I know that people will say that. I don't know. I'm looking at some of your comments, and I'm guessing that a lot of you feel the same. That guy Norm says 65 million for one good season at 28, no chance. Core Gamer Zone doesn't believe that there's any substance to this. He says that Solanke is just a smokescreen. Ray says, so 50 million for Ramsdale is crazy, but 65 for Solanke isn't. Hold on a minute. I haven't said anything of that nature, have I? I actually think 65 for Solanke is mad as well. Gav says, I get that he's got Premier League experience, but 65 for a 28-year-old is a big gamble. When you think that we paid 65 for Kai Havertz, who's like 4 years younger than him, it does seem like a massive gamble, doesn't it? Mind you, he's not 28, by the way. He's 26. So just to clarify that, I've just checked that as well. So, okay, he's 2 years older than Kai Havertz was when we signed him. I look at his 23-24 season. He had a good campaign. To get 19 Premier League goals and 3 assists in 38 games in a side that aren't one of the big six, aren't competing right at the top end of the table, he's a pretty good return. It's really good going. He got a goal in the FA Cup and a goal in the Carabao Cup as well. But the thing that concerns me with Dominic Solanke is that I feel like he's having a bit of a purple patch in terms of his career. And if I go to, let me just filter this to all seasons in the Premier League. Let's figure this out. Hold on a second. If this page ever loads. There we go. It's coming. There we go. So look at his Premier League seasons prior. Okay. And I know that he spent some seasons in the Championship. And I've got a feeling on Dominic Solanke that I'm going to share that I think a lot of you are probably going to take issue with and disagree with. But I'm going to say it anyway. We'll get to that in a minute. Look at his Premier League seasons. Okay. 21 appearances at Liverpool in the 17-18 season. He only played 581 minutes. So he was very much a bit part player. Got the 1 goal that season. I'm not going to look at that one. We'll discard that one. 10 games for Bournemouth in the 18-19 season. Not a single goal. But again, only played a handful of minutes. Just 341 minutes that year. So do you know what? We'll discard that one as well. In the 19-20 season, he made 32 appearances for Bournemouth and he scored 3 goals. In the 22-23 season, he made 33 appearances for Bournemouth and he only got 6 goals. In the Premier League, in the season that's just gone on, he has essentially nearly trebled his return of goals, 19 goals. So the point that I'm trying to make about Dominic Solanke is great. Had a magnificent season last time. But is he capable of repeating that? And is he capable of sustaining those levels? Based on the evidence of his career to date, he is not. And so I am not going to say that it's a good idea to go and spend north of £60 million on Dominic Solanke. If I change this now from Premier League to Championship, and I filter this again, and we look at his Championship returns, 15 goals in 40 appearances in the 2021 season and 29 goals in 46 appearances in the 21-22 season. So Dominic Solanke, do you know where I think he fits? I think he's in that weird space of, over the course of his career, he's been in that kind of in-between zone of too good for the Championship, but maybe not good enough for the Premier League. And only this season has he shown that he's a Premier League striker and that, you know, he's good enough to mix it with those in the top flight. But one season of evidence isn't enough for me to say that he's capable now of playing with one of the really, really big boys. Bournemouth is almost the perfect place. They play a really good brand of football. They build up a lot around him. You know, he's worked really, really well with Andoni Iraola. They seem to have got the best out of each other. Great, fine, it works. But to say that based on this record, he's up to the task of leading the line for Arsenal is fanciful. And to say that we should spend north of £60 million on him is where it crosses from fanciful to damn right bonkers for me. So I'm not interested in this deal at all. I don't think he's a player that I would be excited about, and I don't think he's a player that Arsenal should be pursuing this summer. I'll take some of your questions and thoughts on everything that we've discussed today in the live chat in just a moment. So stay with us. Please do leave a like on the video if you haven't done so already. There's no reason why we shouldn't have at least 100 on the board. If you wouldn't mind subscribing as well, I'd be super grateful. That really, really does help too. We're not too far away from 34,000 subscribers here on YouTube, which is great. And if you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review, whether that be on Apple or Spotify. It really does help. Somebody put a really good suggestion in the chat earlier, which I favorited. Thank you to Grady Gallagher for this. Good afternoon, Harry. I was thinking that to increase review numbers on the audio platforms, you could add an incentive like designating time to read out reviews on the show. If people are interested in that, I'm game. I'll tell you what, every review that I get on those platforms, I will read it out on this show. They really, really do help me, guys, more than you will know. Just like liking, just like subscribing. A big thank you as well to a group of people that signed up yesterday on Patreon. You can join the Chronicles of Aguna's Patreon page via the link in the description below. You can sign up for free over the course of the summer, but if you prefer to go one further, or you'd like to go one further, and no one would prefer to pay money, but if you'd like to go one further and support the pod as well, I'd be super, super grateful. And you can do that, as I say, via the link below. But there is no obligation, there's no pressure, there's no hard feelings if you don't. But yeah, check it out. Okay, short pause, and when we come back, your questions to wrap up today's episode of the Chronicles of Aguna. Okay, then let's have a look at some of these questions that you guys have been sending through via the live chat. Gav says, question, Harry, who is your first choice striker option? So of the players that we've been linked with, because I'm not just going to pluck names out of the air. Of the players that we've been linked with, my number one would be Alexander Isak, although I appreciate and acknowledge and accept that is incredibly unlikely. After Isak, looking at all the things I've been looking at, I'll probably go with SESKO. Then I'll probably go with Osimhen, proven goal scorer. And then I'll probably put Zirkzee in at fourth because I really like him as well and what he offers in the build-up. So, yeah, those would be my options. Cass makes a good point about strikers and their prices always being overinflated. He says, I feel there are only a handful who warrant their price, but Solanke is no way worth 65 million. He's worth that maybe to Bournemouth, though, as he's their main striker. Yeah, for Bournemouth, it's different, isn't it? But yeah, I've given you my order. Andy Jackson says, imagine if someone told you 12 months ago that Havertz and Solanke would be leading Arsenal's attack. Andy, do you know something that we don't? Because Dominic Solanke isn't an Arsenal player as far as I'm aware. I don't know if you know something different, but hey. Any news on Zirkzee? I mentioned it briefly just at the top of that Solanke section, that reports in Italy say that Arsenal haven't sort of given up all interest in Joshua Zirkzee. He's a player that we've heard us sort of being linked with quite a bit in recent times. As far as I'm aware, there is no talks ongoing and there isn't any sort of progress on that. But according to these reports from Sky Italy, and I have no reason to believe that they're not genuine, he is someone that Arsenal are still considering and still looking at. And we've heard quite a bit over the last few weeks that Arsenal have got some decisions to make in that centre forward position. And, they'll need to make their minds up. We know that the SESKO situation, which I think a lot of us maybe got sucked into believing was further down the line, and actually it is, has maybe left people feeling a little bit disappointed. We know that his release clause runs out at the end of this month, so you feel like you want to get that done. We kept hearing at the beginning of the SESKO to Arsenal stuff that there was a desire to complete any deal or for him to at least decide on his future ahead of the European Championships. And we've only got a few days until they kick off. So as I answered the question on yesterday's pod, do I think there'll be any business announced before the Euros? To be honest with you, I don't. And I think that, the market is going to be slow until after that tournament is done. There'll be players that come out of that tournament looking really good that people will rush to the market to buy. And there'll be players that maybe you look at and you think their values may be taking a bit of a hit if they don't have a good tournament, for example. So international tournament years are normally quite difficult to read. Ivan says, is there any reason the Gyökeres links died down so much? Not that I'm aware of. The only thing I can assume, my friend, is that maybe the interest wasn't as strong as was suggested and reported. He's got a massive release clause, Victor Gyökeres, 100 million euros. And I just think there's probably a lot of clubs out there that don't think they can deal in that realm and who maybe would have reservations around whether he as an individual is worth that. I've said it over and over again, there's no reason why you can't go in with a lower offer and try and do a deal at that price, but that's a big old release clause. 100 million euros on today's exchange rates, 84.5 million pounds. And if I'm saying Dominic Solanke, who's done it in the Premier League, isn't worth 65, and we're talking about Gyökeres, who did it in the Championship for a year and now he's doing it in the Portuguese top flight. Like, I'm not saying that Gyökeres is worse than Solanke, but I'm saying that there isn't that much more evidence to back Gyökeres over Solanke, and therefore, how can you explain that there's a 20 million pound price difference between the two? And I'm telling you in the first place that Solanke's price is crazy. If Solanke's real value, in my opinion, which is about 40 odd million pounds, was taken into consideration, then you'd be arguing that Victor Gyökeres is worth double that. So I think with him, it is literally a case of the money is bonkers and nobody's going to budge on that at this stage. And unless you've got the buy-in of the player, you're not really going to go in and start negotiating for players, at those silly prices if, you've got any reservations whatsoever. But hey, that's my take on it. Guys, I'm going to love you and leave you. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. We'll be back tomorrow with another one. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Goodbye.